Diane Osai always thought she had a good life. She had been married to Peter for 16 years, a home where laughter and love seemed to live in every corner. While their marriage wasn't perfect, she had no reason to believe it was anything other than what it seemed. Peter, an affectionate, hard-working husband who traveled frequently for business but always returned with stories of far-off places and thoughtful gifts. For Diane, it was enough. It was safe. But life has a way of shattering what we hold sacred. Take a moment to imagine everything you thought you knew, everything you held dear, suddenly crumbling. It began with a phone call, a normal day, until the voice on the other end told her that Peter had been in a serious car accident. The words critical condition clung to her as she rushed to the hospital, heart pounding with the thought that this man, her Peter, might be slipping away from her. But nothing could prepare her for what she found in that hospital room. Can you picture the panic, the fear, rushing to the hospital with your heart in your throat, only to find that the man you thought you knew had been living a double life? This is where things get complicated. Peter wasn't alone in the car. The woman, Rachel, was dead. So was a young boy, a child who, according to the doctors, was Peter's son. The only survivor was a young girl, Diamond, who had no one left but Peter, and now, Diane. In that moment, the world Diane had built, the life she thought was real, crumbled beneath her feet. Peter had another family, a hidden life she had never even suspected. The news of Peter's double life settled into Diane's chest like a stone. She had questions, so many questions, but Peter was in a coma, unable to answer any of them. How long had this been going on? Did her children know? Had he loved Rachel more than he loved her? These thoughts circled endlessly, a whirlwind of doubt and betrayal. Diane found herself replaying the past, looking for signs she might have missed. There were the unexplained absences, the work trips that seemed just a bit too frequent, the times Peter would drift off, seemingly lost in thought. Had he been thinking of them? Of her? But the real blow came when Diane learned the extent of Peter's deception. He had provided for Rachel and her children, using their family's finances to buy them a home, gifts, and luxuries Diane hadn't even known they could afford. He had been living two lives, one with her, the other with Rachel, and it all felt like a mockery of the life they had built together. How could he do this to her? The question echoed in her mind, night after night, as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. It wasn't just that he had lied. It was the depth of the lie, the years of deceit, and the fact that he had chosen to live a life that was meant to be theirs with someone else. Diane's trust, her sense of stability, had been shattered, leaving only anger and a raw, throbbing pain. Meanwhile, Diane was forced in the hospital to take Diamond along with her, since she's her husband's daughter, but she had no objection. When they arrived home, Diamond was left locked outside, exposed to the heavy rain. As the cold rain poured down on her, she remembered the last time rain beat her, how her mother pampered her, and the instructions she gave her to wait next time until the rain stopped before she will return home. Now, she stood drenched, with no shelter, and no idea where she would sleep for the night, feeling completely hopeless. Diamond has become a ghost in Diane's house, a reminder of everything Diane had lost. Diamond was shy, withdrawn, barely speaking a word as she moved through the house. Diane couldn't bring herself to engage with her, to comfort her, though she knew she should. Every time she looked at the child, all she could see was Peter's betrayal, embodied in flesh and blood. Diamond was an innocent in all of this, but Diane's emotions were too tangled to separate guilt from grief, betrayal from responsibility. Diamond was Peter's child. She had lost her mother, her brother, and now her father lay in a coma, leaving Diane as the only person who could care for her. But how could she? How could she take in this child, knowing she was the product of a life Peter had chosen to keep from her? Diamond, for her part, felt the coldness in Diane's eyes. She sensed the tension in every unspoken word and silent moment. She retreated into herself, keeping her head down, never wanting to cause trouble. She missed her mother deeply, missed her brother's laughter, missed the life she had known. In her quietest moments, she wondered if it was her fault, if somehow her existence had driven her father to lead two lives. She began to write in a diary, pouring out her thoughts where no one could see them. She wrote about the accident, the terror of losing her family, and the strange, cold woman who now had to care for her. She didn't blame Diane, not really. How could she? Her father had created this mess, and now they were both left to deal with the aftermath. As the days stretched on, Diane felt like she was suffocating under the weight of her emotions. Grief for the life she had lost, mixed with anger at Peter, at the injustice of it all. Every time she saw Charity, her closest friend, she would break down, the tears spilling from her eyes uncontrollably. Charity listened, offering comfort in her own soft way, always reminding Diane that Diamond wasn't to blame. But how could Diane believe that? It was too much to take in. Her mind was constantly at war. Part of her wanted to send Diamond away, to rid her life of this constant reminder of Peter's betrayal. But every time she even thought about it, guilt consumed her. Diamond was just a child, an innocent bystander in this mess. Diane knew that sending her away wouldn't bring back her old life. It wouldn't heal her broken heart. And so, the tension between them lingered. Diane, lost in her grief and anger, barely spoke to the girl. Diamond, too afraid to ask for anything, remained silent, her presence a quiet shadow in the house. It was late one night when Diane finally reached her breaking point. She had found herself wandering through the house, unable to sleep. Passing her maid's room where Diamond stayed, she noticed the door slightly open and saw the girl asleep, her face streaked with tears. On her bedside table lay the diary, its pages slightly open. Diane, drawn by a mix of curiosity and guilt, picked it up. She hadn't meant to read it. She knew it was wrong, but as her eyes scanned the page, she was struck by the raw honesty of Diamond's words. The girl wasn't angry at her. She wasn't even angry at Peter. She was just lost, confused, alone. The words painted a picture of a child desperate for understanding, desperate for some kind of connection in a world that had abandoned her. Diane sat down on the bed, clutching the diary, the weight of it all crashing down on her. She had been wrong. All this time, she had directed her anger at a child who had done nothing to deserve it. Diamond had lost everything, her family, her sense of security, and now Diane had been treating her like an intruder in her own home. That night was a turning point for Diane. She realized she had been holding on to her anger, letting it consume her to the point where she couldn't see the truth anymore. Diamond wasn't her enemy. She was just a girl who had lost her family, just like Diane had lost hers. The next morning, Diane made the first move. It was small, just an apology, a few quiet words spoken as they both prepared for the day. But for Diamond, it was everything. Think about it for a second. When someone who has hurt you deeply, even if unintentionally, offers an olive branch, it's a moment of vulnerability on both sides. And in this case, it marked the beginning of a new relationship, not built on lies, but on the shared understanding of their pain. Diane explained how hurt and confused she had been, how difficult it was to process Peter's betrayal. She didn't ask for forgiveness, but in that moment, something shifted between them. For the first time, they both acknowledged the pain they were carrying. From that moment, Diane and Diamond began to take tentative steps toward healing. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't easy. There were still days when the pain resurfaced, when Diane would see Peter's face in her mind, and the anger would return. But over time, she began to see Diamond not as the product of an affair, but as a child who needed her. They moved into a new house together, leaving behind the memories of the past. Diane knew there was still a long road ahead, but for the first time, she felt hope. She wasn't just a woman betrayed by her husband. She was a mother, rebuilding her life with a child who had been through just as much as she had. And in that new life, they began to find peace. Forgiveness, Diane realized, wasn't something that happened all at once. It was a process, one she was just beginning to understand. But with each day that passed, she felt herself letting go, bit by bit. By the time they truly settled into their new home, Diane and Diamond had formed a bond neither of them had expected. It wasn't the bond of blood, but something else, something born from shared pain and the desire to heal. Diane no longer saw Diamond as a reminder of Peter's betrayal, but as a child who needed her love and guidance. Together, they discovered that forgiveness and love were stronger than the pain they had endured. They learned to lean on each other, to trust in the possibility of a new future, a future where they could build a family, not based on lies, but on trust and understanding. Now, if you've been drawn into this story, you owe it to yourself to experience the full movie. This powerful narrative was brought to life by Ruth Kadiri 123 on YouTube, and you can watch the entire film by clicking in the description. Trust me, the emotional depth and performances will stay with you long after the credits roll. Thank you for taking this journey with us. Remember, healing takes time, but it's always possible.